A broke college student agreed to marry a 75-year-old woman for her money. But her will revealed a shocking secret. About his past. Everyone in the chapel assumed it was a publicity stunt. How else could anyone explain the image of 22-year-old Jake Harlow, young, nervous, and barely managing to hold his rented tux together, standing beside Eleanor Whitmore, the enigmatic 75-year-old widow, known more for her isolation than her fortune? The murmurs rippled through the guests like static. Why would someone like her marry him? Is this legal? He must be after her money. But Jake wasn't looking at her. He wasn't even looking at the priest. His eyes were fixed, ahead, like someone preparing to walk into a storm. Because in a way this wasn't love, this wasn't destiny. This was survival, until her will revealed something that would upend everything Jake thought he knew about himself. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment telling us what you think is really going on. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Jake's story didn't begin in a mansion or a courtroom. It began with a locked mailbox, 2 weeks of unpaid rent, and a final notice from Columbia's financial aid office. He had worked so hard to get there, raised by a single mother in a crumbling Detroit apartment. No family support, no backup plan. Just dreams duct-taped together with scholarships and caffeine. But by senior year, reality caught up to him. His part-time job barely covered groceries. The scholarships had dried up. His mom had passed away 2 years earlier, and the father whose name he never knew. Nothing more than a blank space on a birth certificate. Then came the email. No subject line, no sender name, just a message at 3:12 a.m. titled, "Proposal, Short-Term Marriage Arrangement." At first, Jake thought it was a scam, but the signature at the bottom was real. Carlton Reese, legal counsel, Whitmore Estate. The offer was almost laughable. Meet with Eleanor Whitmore, agree to marry her for 1 year, fulfill select public obligations, and receive a sum of money upon completion. It sounded like a movie plot, or a trap. But desperation is a strange motivator. By Friday, Jake found himself standing in a walnut-paneled study with Persian rugs underfoot and a glass of water that tasted more expensive than anything he'd ever consumed. And across from him sat Eleanor Whitmore, poised, pale, and watching him with the detached curiosity of someone observing a museum exhibit. "I won't insult you by pretending this is romantic," she said, her voice soft, deliberate. "This is a contract, 1 year. In exchange, you'll be compensated, but more importantly, you'll be remembered." Jake blinked. Remembered for what? She didn't answer. He signed anyway. The wedding was arranged in 10 days, no family from Jake's side. Eleanor invited no one, not even her housekeeper. Just her lawyer, Carlton, and 2 witnesses hired from a staffing agency. Jake wore a suit 2 sizes too big. Eleanor wore white, not a gown but a clean pressed dress suit, complete with pearls and a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Eleanor reached for Jake's hand, placed a ring on his finger and whispered, "Now the real work begins." For weeks their arrangement was exactly as outlined. Separate bedrooms, no physical affection, minimal interaction. Jake lived in the east wing of the estate, in a guest room that was nicer than any hotel he'd ever dreamed of. Eleanor spent her days in the solarium, reading antique books and taking afternoon calls to the Foundation, though Jake never saw any proof of one. The house was huge, too huge for 2 people, with hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly and doors that led to nowhere. Jake tried to stay out of trouble. He respected the rules. But something about that house made it impossible to ignore the feeling that not everything was as it seemed. One night, he wandered past the solarium after midnight and noticed a door slightly ajar. The room behind it was dark. He pushed it open, thinking maybe he'd finally found the library Carlton mentioned, but instead he found a narrow staircase descending into pitch black. As he stepped forward, a voice behind him broke the silence. "Some doors should stay closed, Mr. Harlow." Jake jumped. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, her face obscured by the hallway shadows. "I get curious sometimes," he stammered. "So do cats," she said, before turning away. The next day, a yellow envelope appeared outside Jake's door. Inside, a single photo, a boy about 10 years old with black hair, blue eyes, and a haunted look. On the back, in cursive, "Some legacies live longer than their names." Jake stared at the photo for hours. He didn't know the boy. But something about the eyes, the way they burned into the lens, felt familiar. Too familiar. Over breakfast, he tried to ask Eleanor about it. "The boy in the photo." But she cut him off. "The past is never polite, Jake. It doesn't knock before entering." From that moment on, Jake's nights became restless. He began to feel watched. The door to the basement was always locked now, and though he tried not to think about it, he kept returning to the question, why him? Why? Did Eleanor pick him? A nobody student with no family, no fame, no future? And then came the next envelope, typed on antique paper, no signature. "The truth is in the will, and the will is already written." Jake didn't know it yet, but the truth would not only explain the marriage, it would redefine his entire identity. Jake sat up most of that night staring at the envelope with the anonymous message. He turned it over again and again, holding it up to the light, as if some hidden watermark or seal would explain who sent it. But there was nothing. Just the smell of aged paper and a strange sense of finality. "The truth is in the will, and the will is already written." The words haunted him. Who would send this? Why now? And more importantly, how did they know? By morning, Jake had barely slept. The mansion, always quiet, now felt too quiet. Every ticking clock sounded like a warning. Every creaking floorboard might as well have been Eleanor watching. She had that kind of presence. Even when she wasn't in the room, she felt present. That morning, she didn't appear for breakfast. The housekeeper, Ms. Durant, simply said, "Mrs. Whitmore is resting in the parlor," and went about dusting silverware that didn't need dusting. Jake nodded and poured himself black coffee, hands trembling. His instinct told him to leave, to pack his duffel bag, thank the estate, walk away, and pretend none of it had happened. But there was a deeper part of him, the same part that survived. Detroit winters with no heat, that watched his mother cough blood into a napkin and never once cry, that needed to stay. Not for the money, not anymore. He needed to know who that boy in the photo was. He needed to know why Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who had the world at her fingertips, had chosen him. That night, unable to bear the silence, he returned to the door he wasn't supposed to find, the one leading to the dark staircase. It was locked again, but this time he noticed something new, a faint scratch near the lock, almost like a mark. It looked like initials. He leaned in. J.R.H. His heart froze. That was his name, Jacob Richard Harlow. He stepped back, adrenaline crashing over him. It had to be a coincidence, or a trick. But deep inside, he knew better. He pressed his hand to the wood, as if it might pulse with some hidden truth. He whispered, "What is this?" The house gave no answer. Back in his room, he opened his laptop and started digging. Eleanor Whitmore's public history was short. Born in Connecticut, married Philip Whitmore in the late 1980s, no children, involved in charities, especially those focused on orphaned children. That caught his attention. He went deeper, scrolling through archived news clippings and old digital scans. One article from 1995 caught his eye. Local boy found abandoned at courthouse steps. Authorities seek relatives. The image was blurry, but Jake saw the boy's face. Black hair, wide blue eyes, that same haunted look from the photo. Eleanor had left. The caption read, "Authorities have named the child John Doe and Woodruff 143. No identifying information was found with him." Jake sat back, his breath shallow. The child could have been him. But he'd always believed his mother had raised him since birth, that she was his only family. But what if she had found him? What if she wasn't his birth mother? He reached for his phone. The contact saved under Mom hadn't rung in over 2 years. She was gone, and so were the answers. The next morning, Eleanor was waiting in the dining room, dressed in lavender, calm, as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Jacob," she said without looking up from her tea. "You know my full name," he replied. "I know many things," she said, setting down her cup. "And so do you now." "Who was the boy in the photo?" She paused. "He was someone very dear to me. and he had my initials carved into the basement door. Eleanor's eyes met his, steady. That door leads to the past, Jacob. If you're going to open it, you better be prepared for what you'll find. I deserve to know, he said. I agree. That night, for the first time, she handed him a key. Silver, cold, old-fashioned. Tomorrow, after breakfast, go alone. Jake held the key like it was made of lead. The next morning, sunlight barely filtered through the mist. Jake didn't eat. He didn't speak. He walked down the hallway, past the solarium, and reached the forbidden door. The key fit. The lock turned. The door creaked open. The staircase was narrow, stone, and cold. Dust swirled with every step. He descended slowly, heart pounding. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered to life when he pulled the chain. The room was small, a basement turned into some kind of archive. Wooden, shelves lined with boxes, files, and old leather journals. Everything smelled like memory. He started with the journals. Most were Philip Whitmore's. Notes about investments, accounts, and odd philosophical musings. But one box, marked Eleanor Private, caught his attention. Inside, photos, letters, hospital records, and then a birth certificate. Baby. Boy, unnamed mother Eleanor Whitmore. Father unknown date, March 13th, 2000. Jake staggered back, nearly knocking over the box. March 13th, that was his birthday. A second document was folded behind it. A formal court order. Termination of parental rights, adoption approved. Dated 6 months later. No names, no further information. Jake stood frozen in that dim basement, the air pressing down on him. Was Eleanor his mother? Had she abandoned him? Why now? Why this arrangement? As he turned to leave, he noticed something else. A sealed envelope tucked between two ledgers. It had no label, no address, just his name, handwritten, Jacob. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter. In Eleanor's precise, elegant handwriting. My dear Jacob, if you've found this, then you've asked the questions I feared you would. I made choices I cannot undo, sacrifices I cannot justify, but everything I've done since then was for you. You were never unwanted, only unprotected. What happened to you was never the plan. Jake sat down, the letter shaking in his hands. He didn't finish reading. Not yet. The truth was too heavy, too raw. He looked around the basement, at the boxes, the evidence, the fragments of a life rewritten, then up the stairs, at the door to the world above. The woman waiting for him upstairs wasn't just his wife on paper anymore. She was something else entirely. Jake emerged from the basement a different man. Something inside him had shifted, cracked open. The air above seemed heavier, thicker with knowledge and shame. He held the letter in his hand like it was made of fire, and every word branded his skin. You were never unwanted, only unprotected. What did that even mean? Why wouldn't she just tell him? Why orchestrate this bizarre marriage and keep him in the dark? When he reached the top of the stairs, Eleanor was already there. She was seated in the hallway, in the same chair she always read from when the sun was strong enough to warm her fragile frame. But this time she wasn't reading. She was waiting. You found it, she said, eyes fixed ahead, not on him. Jake wanted to scream. Instead, his voice came out low and trembling. Why? She sighed. Because I had to know what kind of man you'd become. Because I needed to see it for myself. Not through records or second-hand stories. I needed to know if the boy I lost had become someone I could trust. You abandoned me. No. I gave you up. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told. I had no choice. Jake's heart beat against his ribs like it wanted out. You let me grow up thinking I was nothing, that I was no one. You left me with questions I never knew I should be asking. I left you with a woman who loved you. He froze. You think I didn't watch, she continued. I sent people to check on you. I made sure you had what you needed, tuition, housing, even your first job application. I did it all quietly. Behind the scenes, I didn't want to interfere. I wanted you to choose your path, and now that you're here, now that you know, the rest is yours. Jake stood there in silence. He wanted to ask why she hadn't reached out, why she'd Let him believe he was alone all those years. But he already knew the answer. Pride, guilt, maybe even fear. "I don't know what to do with this," he said, finally holding up the letter. "You do what you've always done," she said. "You survive." That evening the house took on a strange stillness. Ms. Durant said Eleanor had gone to bed early. Jake stayed in the east wing, staring at the fireplace long after the logs had turned to ash. When he finally slept, his dreams were filled with broken cradles, handwritten letters, and a woman in white walking away down a long hallway. The following morning, Jake awoke to a knock at his door. It was Carlton Reese, Eleanor's long-time lawyer. His face was solemn. "Mrs. Whitmore passed in her sleep," he said. Jake didn't cry, he didn't speak. He only nodded and sat back on the edge of the bed, her letter still on the nightstand beside him. The funeral was private. Only Jake, Carlton, and 2 staff members from the estate attended. No priest, no ceremony. Just a cold wind and the sound of dirt hitting wood. Afterward, Carlton handed Jake another envelope. This one was thick, sealed with wax. "It's from her will," he explained. "She wanted you to have this immediately." Inside was a second letter and several documents. The letter read, "Jacob, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, but that's not the end of our story, not even close. I've left you the estate, the foundation, and all associated accounts. But I've also left you a responsibility. One I hope you'll accept, not out of guilt, but out of the same stubborn goodness I saw in your eyes the first day we met." Jake scanned the papers. She had made him the legal heir to everything. Her fortune, her properties, even her non-profit foundation focused on helping at-risk youth. There were account numbers, property deeds, passwords. Everything was now in his name. But there was one more thing, a clause. Before you receive the final transfer, you must complete one task. Find the woman who raised you and give her this. Attached was a small box. Inside, a locket, gold. Engraved with the initials MLH. Jake's throat closed. Mary Louise Harlow, the woman he'd always called Mom. She had passed away years ago after a battle with pneumonia. But Jake had never known her middle name, never thought to ask, and yet Eleanor had. The next weeks were a blur, legal meetings, property tours, fund transfers. Jake barely kept up, but he didn't forget the locket. He took it with him every day, tucked into his jacket pocket like a compass, a reminder. Then came the day he visited the grave. Mary Louise Harlow, beloved mother, teacher, and friend. 1961-2019. Jake knelt beside the stone and placed the locket on the soil. "She said you loved me when she couldn't, that you were the only reason I'm still here." The wind whispered through the trees like a voice half-remembered. He didn't know what he believed, only that it felt like the right thing to do. Back at the mansion, Jake started sorting through the foundation files. He found donor lists, scholarship programs, old letters from students who had received help. And in one folder marked special cases, he found a name he never expected. Harlow Jacob R. There were photos, school reports, progress notes, even old medical forms. Eleanor had followed his life from a distance for years. She had been his silent guardian, orchestrating his survival from the shadows. But there was one file deeper still, sealed with red tape. It was labeled Project Echo Phase 2. Jake opened it. Inside were photos not of him but of others, children, all with the same eyes, same haunted gaze, dozens of them. Jake stared at the file labeled Project Echo Phase 2 long. After he had finished reading its contents, the children in those photos weren't just random cases. They all looked like him, variations of a blueprint he hadn't known existed. Boys and girls from different states, different names, different backgrounds, but the same features, the same hollow sadness in their eyes. The more he looked, the more he realized this wasn't coincidence. It was design. He flipped through more documents inside the sealed folder. There were medical reports, some coded with symbols and numbers he didn't understand, and others clearly outlining experiments, control groups, and follow-up procedures. Charts tracked emotional development, social interactions, learning patterns. One graph had his name beside it, Subject 12. His hands trembled. He had always known he felt different growing up, like he didn't fully belong anywhere, but He'd chalked that up to trauma or poverty. Never had he imagined he might have been watched, monitored, engineered. What was Project Echo? Who was running it? And why had Eleanor been involved? A sudden realization hit him. If he was Subject 12, that meant there were at least 11 others. He scanned the pages, searching for names, locations, anything, and there they were, coded entries followed by dates, birth cities, and institutions. Subject 3, Tulsa. Subject 8, Denver. Subject 11, Mobile. He pulled out a sheet at the back labeled Reunification Probability Index. His eyes narrowed. Each subject had a percentage. His name, Jacob R. Harlow, 94.7%. Most others hovered below 50%. What did that even mean? Jake had to get out of the house. He needed air, space, something real. He grabbed the keys and left through the east door, stepping into the cold afternoon sunlight that barely touched the massive stone terrace. His mind raced. Was he part of some government experiment, a private foundation's twisted legacy, or something darker? He drove for hours without direction, letting the road lead. Past the town limits, through winding back roads, until he ended up in front of a low red brick building he hadn't seen in years. Westvale Community Center, the place where he'd gotten his first tutoring sessions, where a strange, older man had once handed him a scholarship envelope and told him he was special. Back then, Jake thought it was charity. Now he wondered if it was surveillance. Inside, the center smelled the same, floor polish and paper and old heat ducts. He walked past the front desk, where the same receptionist still wore her thick glasses and long cardigan. She looked up, squinting. "Jake Harlow?" "Yeah," he said. "It's been a while. You here to see Mr. Grady?" Jake blinked. "Mr. Grady's still around?" "Office in the back," she said. "He never really left." Jake walked. Down the hall, each step echoing louder than the last. He pushed open the wooden door and stepped inside. The old man behind the desk hadn't changed much. Thinner, maybe, but the same sharp eyes. The same eerie calm. "I figured this day would come," Mr. Grady said without looking up. Jake froze. "You knew?" "I knew you'd start asking questions. You're not the first." Jake sat down. "What is Project Echo?" Mr. Grady finally looked up. "A mistake, a dream, a tragedy. That doesn't tell me anything. It tells you everything," he said. "It started as an experiment in resilience. The idea was simple. If you could place children into broken environments and track how they adapted, you could learn how to build the perfect survivor. Not the smartest, not the strongest, the most durable, the most invisible." Jake's stomach twisted. "And I was one of them?" "You were one of the last, the 12th. The final hope that maybe something beautiful could grow out of ruin." Jake slammed his fist on the desk. "This isn't beauty. This is manipulation." Mr. Grady didn't flinch. "And yet here you are, alive, educated, capable, stronger than we ever predicted. You weren't just monitored, Jake. You were protected by Eleanor. She was one of the original funders, but she turned against the program once she saw the cost. You were her breaking point. She begged to pull you out, said you deserved a real life, but by then it was too late. The system was already watching." Jake stood, fists clenched. "Where are the others?" Mr. Grady sighed. "Some vanished, some didn't make it. A very few, are still out there, like you." Jake stormed out, anger boiling under his skin. He got back in the car and drove until the sky went black and the stars scattered overhead like shattered glass. He didn't stop until he reached the mansion again, parked crooked on the gravel and sat in silence. He was tired. Not just from the day, but from the years he now realized had been stolen from him. He had no idea who he truly was, only what others had allowed him to become. Inside, the lights were low. Ms. Durant had gone home. Jake wandered to the library, sat in Eleanor's old reading chair, and stared into the empty hearth. The folder with the name still rested on the table beside him. He picked it up again and studied the entries. Subject 6, Brooklyn, NY. Adopted through Bright Futures Home. Subject 9, Charleston, SC. Placed via special program. Subject 12, Jacob R. Harlow. Status contact established. He took out a notepad and began copying the information. One name, then another, then another. He was going to find them, every single one, and he was going to tell them the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat at Eleanor's massive desk with the folder open in front of him, a legal pad to his left and a black fountain pen in his hand. The silence in the mansion was suffocating, broken only by the occasional crackle of the radiator pipes. For hours, he copied down every detail he could find. Cities, orphanage names, medical notes, even initials. His handwriting became increasingly erratic, slanting across the page like a man trying to outrun a truth he couldn't escape. He didn't stop because he was hopeful. He stopped because there was nothing left to write. By morning, the mansion felt colder than usual. Grey light spilled through the tall windows like fog trapped in glass. Jake made a pot of coffee he never drank, instead pacing the marble floor in the library until he wore a faint path into the rug. He kept turning the same idea over and over in his mind. What if the others had no idea who they really were? What if they were just like him, walking around with borrowed names and false origins, never knowing they'd been part of something engineered? He thought of the boy in the Denver file. Subject 8. Deviant cognitive behavior, above average, empathy, relocated twice due to attachment issues. He thought of Subject 3, the girl from Tulsa who had vanished from records at age 11. Family withdrawal, incomplete documentation. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea that these people existed and were out there, or the possibility that he might be the only one left who even cared. Still, he had to try. Jake began with the name he could confirm, Micah Tremblay, Subject 6. According to the file, Micah had been adopted through a private agency in Brooklyn and later awarded a juvenile art fellowship under a different name. Jake searched social media for nearly an hour before he found a match, an artist named M.T. Grayson, known for abstract portraits of faceless children. His bio read, Brooklyn-based, survivor of systems I didn't ask for. It hit Jake like a gut punch. He drafted a message, simple, careful. Hi, you don't know me, but I think we might have something in common. I grew up in the system too, but I recently discovered there may be more to our stories. If this sounds strange, I understand, but if you've ever felt like your past was incomplete, please write me back. He hesitated before clicking send. Then he moved on to Subject 9, Emma Clark, listed as living in Charleston, South Carolina, adopted at age 5. The file included the name of a counselor, Janice O'Malley. Jake called the number on the sheet, fully expecting it to be disconnected. But a voice answered. Dr. O'Malley's office. Jake's voice cracked as he asked for her. A moment. Later, a woman picked up. This is Janice. I'm trying to find someone. Emma Clark. She was a patient of yours about 15 years ago. There was a pause. Who is this? My name is Jake Harlow. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think Emma and I were part of the same program. Something called Project Echo. The line went silent. Jake heard her breath catch. Then, who gave you that name? Eleanor Whitmore. Oh my God, Janice whispered. I haven't heard that name in over a decade. Jake's hand gripped, the receiver tighter. She passed away, left me a file. Emma was in it. Another pause. Emma was one of the brightest children I ever worked with, but there were things I could never explain. Night terrors, dissociation. She would talk about other families, other names. Do you know where she is now? She left Charleston years ago, moved west, I think. But she used to send postcards. The last one came from Flagstaff, Arizona. Jake thanked her and wrote it down. 2 leads. It wasn't much, but it was something. Back at the mansion, he updated his notes and started building a map. Pins marked Brooklyn, Charleston, Denver, Tulsa. A constellation of lost souls. The project was bigger than he imagined, and yet, somehow, it felt personal. Intimate. Like a puzzle meant only for him to solve. He spent the next 3 days buried in research, sleeping only when his body gave out, eating when he remembered to. He contacted foundations, orphanages, old caseworkers, some dead ends, others cautiously helpful. A few outright denied any knowledge of such a program, but one night, just as He was about to shut his laptop. He received a reply from mitgrayson.artegmail.com. Subject, Re. Echo, the email was short. You're not crazy. I've seen the folder too. I thought I was the only one. Where can we meet? Jake's heart skipped. He typed back instantly. Name the place. Micah replied within minutes. Red Hook, the dock near Pier 3, midnight tomorrow. Jake booked a flight to New York. When he arrived, the city was wet and cold. He rented a car and drove to the pier, his breath fogging as he stepped out into the salty air. The dock was nearly deserted. At midnight, a man appeared from the shadows, tall, lean, wearing a dark coat and a knit cap. Jake, he asked. Jake nodded. Micah stepped forward, eyes wary. How much do you know? Jake handed him a copy of the file. Enough to be afraid, not enough to understand. Micah took the papers, scanning quickly. Then he nodded once. You're real. I wasn't sure. What is this? Jake asked. What did they do to us? Micah looked out at the black water. They made us forget, but our eyes remember. The cold at Red Hook that night wasn't just physical. It clung to Jake's skin like the weight of memory. He stood by the waterfront with Micah, the two men separated by a lifetime of unknowns, yet united by a few shared pages of a forgotten file and the scars that hadn't faded. The fog rolled in from the harbor, blanketing the dock in a mist that distorted the edges of reality, and for a moment, Jake wondered if all of this, Micah, the journal, the revelations, might vanish. Into the vapor, too. Micah was the first to break the silence. He pulled a weathered leather-bound notebook from his coat and passed it to Jake without a word. Jake opened it with care. Inside, pages were filled with detailed sketches. A narrow hallway lined with mirrors, a windowless room filled with child-sized cots, the outline of a wrist with a small barcode inked into the skin. There were also symbols, strange recurring motifs, an eye within a circle, a triangle pierced by a vertical line. One page held 12 stick figures arranged in a ring. Each was labeled with a number and a word: 1, control; 2, escape; 3, silence; 4, loyalty; 5, pain; 6, grief. It ended with 12, resolve. That's us, Jake asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Micah gave a tired nod. The ones I know of. I was subject 6, you're 12. There was a boy in Portland, subject 8. He'd stopped trusting anyone. Said we were still being watched. Jake looked up. What happened to him? He's dead. They said suicide. But it didn't feel right. Not with how careful he was. A knot formed in Jake's stomach. The idea that someone might still be watching them felt less like paranoia now and more like prophecy. The mansion, the files, the strange coincidences throughout his life, it was all beginning to make an ugly kind of sense. Micah turned back to the water. They didn't stop with us. After the first 12, I found signs of a second group. A new generation, more refined, less human. Jake gripped the notebook. How do you know? Patterns, Micah said simply. News stories, medical outliers, children with no history who show up in elite institutions. Always the same markers. There's a phase 3, but it's harder to track. Jake stared down at the sketches again. Do you think Eleanor knew about them? She knew more than she let on. She tried to get you out, but she couldn't break the contract. That's why she kept you close. Marrying you was the only way to put you in her custody without drawing attention. Jake was stunned. The marriage, everything he thought was manipulation or eccentricity, had been her attempt to protect him. He had been angry at her, resented her, but maybe she had loved him in her own way. Micah glanced at him. So what do you want to do with all this? Jake's answer came fast, sharp. Find the others, tell them, give them the truth. Then you'll need help. They exchanged numbers and agreed to use encrypted apps for communication. Micah handed Jake a flash drive. Everything I've found: contacts, code names, locations. But be careful. Some of them don't want to be found. Jake nodded. I'll take that risk. Back in the mansion, the air felt different, charged. Jake stayed up for 3 straight nights, reading through Micah's data. The files referenced obscure government programs, shell foundations, adoption agencies that had closed decades earlier. He built a map of every location mentioned: foster homes, clinics, schools. Slowly, patterns emerged. Then he focused on subject 2, Casey Lynn. Casey's file was thin but intriguing. Born in San Francisco, bounced through 5 foster homes by the time she was 9. Behavioral notes flagged her as mechanically gifted but emotionally disengaged. The last known placement was in Sacramento. Jake followed the breadcrumbs, combing through local records, digging into archived newspapers, and even joining online forums for adults who aged out of the foster care system. It took him 2 weeks to find a match. A motorcycle mechanic in Reno had posted a photo of his new employee, a young woman with sharp eyes and oil-streaked cheeks, posing beside a rebuilt 1963 Bonneville. Jake enlarged the image and saw it instantly. The posture, the intensity, the same gaze from the childhood photo in the file. It had to be her. He drove to Reno overnight, his mind spiraling with questions. Would she believe him? Would she even remember? What if she was already running from something and he'd just lead danger to her doorstep? He parked across from the garage and waited, watched her work for hours. Her movements were efficient, practiced, every gesture precise. This wasn't a girl who'd stumbled into her trade. She was born to manipulate machines, as if the language of engines and torque was more natural to her than speech. On the 3rd day, she approached him. "You've been parked here 3 times. Either you're casing the place or you're lost," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. Jake stepped out. "You're Casey Lynn." Her posture stiffened. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jake Harlow. I think we have something in common, a history we didn't choose." She eyed him with suspicion, then tilted her head. "You're one of them." Jake blinked. "What?" "I used to dream about you. Not your face exactly, but someone like you. Coming to find me. I thought it meant I was crazy." "You're not," Jake said. "You were subject 2. Casey didn't flinch. She turned and walked back into the garage, closed the door behind you. Inside, she led him to a back room lined with spare parts and toolboxes. From a shelf behind a stack of brake pads, she pulled out an old shoebox. Inside were clippings, photos, and a patch sewn with the emblem of an eye in a triangle. "They called it the Watch," she said. "I don't know what it means, but I've seen it before, in my dreams, in weird flashes, like memories that aren't mine." Jake nodded slowly. "You're not the only one." He pulled out the journal Micah had given him and opened it to the emblem. Casey stared, then ran a hand through her short hair. "So it's real," she whispered. "All of it." She sat on a stool, exhaling hard. "What do we do now?" "We find the others," Jake said, "and we stop whoever's still running. This." Casey looked up at him with something almost like hope. "Then I'm in." They sat in silence for a while after that, the hum of the garage the only sound between them. Jake looked around. Engine parts, oil stains, the faint smell of burnt rubber. This was Casey's sanctuary. It reminded him of Eleanor's study. Different tools, same need for control, for purpose. "I used to take things apart," Casey said. "Suddenly, when I was a kid, radios, clocks, engines, not to break them, just to understand them." Jake nodded. "I used to write letters to someone who didn't exist, an imaginary brother. I told him everything, thought maybe somewhere he'd answer." She glanced at him. "And did he?" Jake gave a half smile. "Not in the way I expected." Casey looked down at her hands, now stained with grease and memory. "I didn't think anyone would ever come looking." Jake reached into his coat and placed Micah's journal on the workbench between them. "We're not just experiments. We're not numbers. We're survivors, and we've been kept in the dark long enough." Casey reached for the journal, her fingers brushing his. "Then let's turn on the lights." Outside, the Nevada sun began to rise, casting gold over the desert town. A new day, a new mission, and the start of something neither of them could yet name, but both were ready to face. Together. The next name on the list wasn't a name at all, just a code name. 9. No last known location, no school records, no adoption files, just a single line written in Micah's notes. "Saw the fire. Survived." Jake stared at those 4 words for hours. It could mean anything. An accident, a house fire, a metaphor for trauma. But something about the phrasing felt literal. So he began searching, starting with fires involving children, survivors with no known guardians, and any mention of suspicious funding or agencies stepping in afterward. It took days of digging, countless dead ends and a few close calls with locked databases, but finally something clicked. A fire at a group home in Akron, Ohio, 12 years ago. 11 children were reported living there. Only 10 were accounted for in the final report. One girl, listed as temporarily placed, was never formally registered. No photo, no name, just the word transient. The fire had been ruled accidental, caused by faulty wiring. But Jake found inconsistencies in the reports, pages missing, names redacted, timing that didn't add up. He booked a flight. When he arrived, the home was long gone, replaced by a strip mall and a coffee shop. But at the local library, he uncovered more. A firefighter's statement, a paramedic's note, a drawing submitted anonymously weeks after the event. A child's scrawl of a girl running through fire, holding a doll. The name scribbled in the corner, May. That was his thread, and he wasn't going to let it go. Jake spent the next 2 days tracking any record of May in the greater Akron area. He visited schools, posed as a freelance journalist, and dug through yearbooks and missing persons reports. Nothing. But when he stopped by a community shelter, the receptionist hesitated when he mentioned the name. May? We had a girl by that name, quiet, tough, worked here for a while last year in the kitchen. Never talked much. Jake's pulse quickened. Do you know where she went? She moved to Columbus. Said she had family, but I never saw anyone visit her. She left an address with the director. I'll check if it's still in the system. She returned with a slip of paper. A tiny apartment complex listed under a foundation Jake recognized from the files. Another shell organization tied to the watch. He drove to Columbus immediately. The building was old but clean, with ivy creeping along the brickwork. He knocked. On the door of apartment 3B, no answer. He tried again. Then he heard movement, a soft shuffling, the creak of floorboards. Finally, the door cracked open just enough to reveal a single wary eye. I'm not selling anything, Jake said quickly. My name is Jake. Jake Harlow. I think you might be someone I've been looking for. Silence. Then the door closed. Jake didn't leave. He sat on the stoop for hours, the autumn wind biting at his jacket, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Just as he was about to give up, the door opened again. May stepped out, arms crossed, wearing a grey hoodie and jeans streaked with paint. Her hair was short, buzzed on the sides, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much too young. You're real, she said. Jake nodded. So are you. She hesitated, then gestured him inside. The apartment was small, just a single room with a kitchenette, a mattress on the floor, and dozens of canvases leaning against the walls. Every one of them depicted fire, buildings engulfed, figures running, eyes staring through flames. One canvas showed 12 silhouettes standing in a ring, surrounded by smoke. May poured them both tea. I used to think they were dreams. The fire, the voices, the experiments, but they're memories, aren't they? Jake nodded. Yes, and you were subject 9. She didn't flinch. I figured. They always called me the resistant one. I never cracked. That's why they tried to erase me. Jake pulled out the journal. She scanned the pages in silence, then grabbed a pen and began sketching over the symbols, adding details, refining. The shapes, I remember more when I draw, she said. Jake watched her. We're building something, a map, a network. We need to find the others. She looked up. How many are left? 5. Maybe less. Some are missing. One is confirmed dead. May stared at the ring of figures she'd just sketched. Then, we don't have time to waste. Jake nodded. We're not alone anymore. That's a start. They sat on the floor surrounded by her paintings, the scent of turpentine thick in the air. Each canvas was another window into May's mind, and she seemed calmer when she spoke through her art than through words. She showed him a series of pieces she'd never shown anyone. Small, tightly composed images of a girl sitting in a sterile white room, wires attached to her arms, eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. I used to scream so loud, they said. The walls would vibrate, she said quietly. But I never gave them what they wanted. I made up stories instead, told them I was from a different planet. That I could burn down the world with my mind. Jake looked at her. What did they do when you said that? They tested me harder, drugs, sleep deprivation, isolation. Then one day, fire. I don't know if I caused it or if someone else did, but the home went up in flames. I remember running through smoke, dragging someone with me, a boy, I think, but when I turned around, he was gone. Jake leaned forward. You saved someone. Maybe. Or maybe I left him behind. She stood and crossed the room to a locked cabinet. From it, she pulled a thin black book, leather-bound and scorched on one edge. I found this in the rubble weeks after. Don't ask me why I went back. Maybe I needed proof it was real. Jake flipped through it. More sketches, notes in a child's handwriting. A name appeared repeatedly. Dr. Asher. Jake froze. I've seen that name before. He was on the board of the watch. Micah's notes said he vanished 6 years ago after a whistleblower mentioned him during a hearing. He was never charged. May pointed to a sketch of a man with sunken cheeks and a crooked tie. That's him? He smelled like metal and lavender. He smiled when he lied. Jake felt fury bloom in his chest. We'll find him. May met his gaze. Then you'll need help. Jake nodded. We have 3 now. You, me, and Casey. We're rebuilding what they tried to erase. She walked to her easel and began a new painting. Then let's make some noise. Jake watched as the first strokes hit the canvas. Flames again, but this time not consuming. This time they formed wings. He knew then that finding the others wasn't just about survival. It was about justice, and maybe even redemption. Before he left, Jake pinned a copy of the network map to May's wall. They marked new names, potential locations, and the gaps that still needed filling. Every detail mattered now. One false move could cost them everything. May handed him a sealed envelope. If anything happens to me, this goes to Casey. She'll know what to do. Jake took it solemnly. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. He paused at the door. You're right, but I know this. We're not victims anymore. We're the ones writing the next chapter. As he stepped out into the night, Jake felt a shift. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already begun. Jake's drive back from Columbus was long and quiet, the kind of silence that made thoughts louder. May's apartment, with its walls full of painted flames, stayed burned in his mind. Every survivor he found brought more questions, but also more weight. They were no longer shadows in a file. They were real people, with faces, fears, and unfinished stories. He stopped at a rest area just past Cincinnati, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through the encrypted chat Micah had set up before he died. A new message blinked in the corner. Sender. Echo 7 message. Saw your post about the fire girl. Don't go further. Eyes are on her, eyes are on you. Jake's heart pounded. The message was sent anonymously, routed through 6 relays. But Echo 7 was a handle Micah once mentioned. Someone deep inside, someone who knew about the watch. He typed a reply. Who's watching? No response. He waited. 10 minutes, 30, nothing. Then, just as he was about to shut off the screen, a second message appeared. You're being followed. You already were. Don't go home. Jake didn't go home. He didn't even drive in that direction. Instead, he turned off at a side exit and took a winding back road into the hills, parking in a motel with no cameras and a broken ice machine. He booked the room under a fake name, one of the last IDs Micah had forged for him, and pulled the curtains tight. He laid everything out on the motel desk. May's envelope for Casey, the copied network map, the journal, the burner phones, and the old recorder Eleanor had given him. He replayed her voice once, just to hear it again. Then he started plotting. There were 5 names left on the original list. 1 was crossed out. Subject 5, confirmed dead. 2 others had partial. Data with cities attached. One of them was marked instability risk high. Jake tapped the file. Subject 3. Seth, last seen in New Orleans, listed with a note. Overdose incident survived. Hallucinations present. Monitored remotely. Jake booked the earliest flight and paid in cash. By the time he landed, the sky over Louisiana was thick with heat and humidity. The city pulsed with life and music, a contrast so sharp to his mission it made him feel like an imposter. But he didn't have time to admire the culture. He headed straight for the address listed in the note, a halfway house on the edge of Treme. The woman at the desk looked him up and down. "You a doctor?" "Something like that," Jake said. "I'm trying to find Seth. He used to stay here." Her expression shifted. "That boy, he was trouble. Smart as hell but dark. Talked to himself. Drew these strange things, symbols, like runes almost." Jake leaned in. "Do you know where he is now?" "He left 6 months ago. Said he was hearing voices in the wire. Last I heard he was crashing with some squatter types out in the Bywater. You'll know the place. Big red X on the door." Jake found the building by sundown. Abandoned, graffiti-scarred, the kind of place neighbors pretended didn't exist. He knocked twice, then pushed the door open. The stench hit first: mildew, sweat, and stale food. Inside, flickering candlelight revealed a figure curled in the far corner, sketching frantically on the floorboards. "Seth?" Jake said. The man turned slowly, eyes sunken but alert, hands shaking, covered in charcoal. "You found me," he whispered, "just like in the dream." Jake stepped closer. "You remember the Institute?" Seth laughed, a low, broken sound. "I remember the screams." Jake crouched. "I'm like you, they tested me too, I escaped." Seth's eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Jake showed him the back of his arm, an old scar shaped like a crescent, just like Micah said all the early subjects had. Seth stared, then nodded slowly. "I tried to forget, but it's in the walls, in the signal. I draw so I don't explode." Jake looked around. The walls were covered in paper, every inch filled with spirals, shapes, faces with eyes scratched out. One drawing stood out, a group of 12 figures surrounding a 13th, bound in chains. Jake's voice was low. "Do you know what this is?" Seth didn't answer. He pointed to a symbol beneath the center figure. It was the emblem of the watch. Seth began pacing the room, muttering to himself. "They told me I was a conduit. That I could receive transmissions others couldn't. At first it was static, white noise, but then I started hearing things, not voices, messages, instructions." Jake listened carefully. "Did they make you do anything?" "No, but they wanted to. They wanted to plug me in to something deeper. They kept saying, 'The root is waking.' I didn't know what that meant, but they kept increasing the tests." Jake opened the journal to a page with a diagram labeled Root Protocol. Seth froze when he saw it. "That's it. That's what they called the final stage." Jake pointed at a string of coordinates. "This looks like a location." Seth hesitated. "I memorized it once before they wiped me. It's in Arizona, some old airfield. They said it was the convergence point." Jake felt the air shift. This wasn't just about recovering lost subjects anymore. It was about stopping something much bigger. "Would you come with me?" Jake asked. Seth looked torn. "I'm not stable. Sometimes I lose time. Sometimes I wake up and I've written things I don't remember." Jake met his eyes. "You're not alone. I've had gaps too. That's why we need each other." Seth finally nodded. "All right, but I need to get something first." He reached beneath a loose floorboard and pulled out a small black box. Inside were dozens of tiny drives, each labeled with numbers, dates, and one single word on the inside. "Truth." "These are memories," Seth said. "Fragments before they tried to erase me." Jake took the box with care. "We'll go through them on the way." As they prepared to leave, Jake's phone buzzed again. A new message from Echo 7, "They're closing in. You're out of time. Go dark." Jake looked at Seth. "We leave now." They exited through the back, into a maze of alleys, never looking back as the first black SUV rolled silently up the block, headlights off, windows tinted. The hunt had begun. They drove all night. Jake stuck to the smallest roads, avoiding highways, and public stops. Seth remained mostly quiet, his fingers twitching every so often as if sketching in the air. When they finally pulled over near a gas station in Mississippi, the sky was bruised with early morning light. Seth leaned against the car and closed his eyes. "You think we can stop it?" Jake didn't answer right away. "I think if we don't, try, no one will." Seth pulled a drive from the box and handed it to Jake. "This one's important. It's about Subject 12, the last one." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you know?" Seth's voice dropped. "They said 12 was the Omega, the key to everything. If we find them, it ends, or begins." Jake pocketed the drive. A strange heaviness settled in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the next step would save them or destroy what little remained. He looked up at the rising sun, a new day unfolding in silence. "We find them all," he whispered. "No matter what it takes." The Arizona desert stretched for miles, flat and colorless, under a sun so bright it seemed to bleach the edges of the sky. Jake hadn't spoken for an hour. Seth sat next to him in the rental, eyes half closed, whispering numbers and fragments of phrases like a broken transmission. The flash drive labeled Subject 12 sat in Jake's lap, untouched. They reached the coordinates just past noon, a long-abandoned airstrip hidden behind a rusted gate and a half-collapsed hangar. From above, it would look like nothing. Just sand, heat, and silence. Jake parked behind a dune and surveyed the area with binoculars. No movement, no guards, just a shimmering mirage of heat. Still, his instincts screamed that this place wasn't dead. It was waiting. "Are you sure this is it?" Jake asked. Seth nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "They brought me here once. I don't remember how it ended." Jake pocketed the drive and stepped out, boots sinking into dry earth. "Then we find out." They moved together toward the hangar. As they crossed the cracked tarmac, a motion sensor clicked somewhere deep inside the structure. A soft hum rose from beneath the earth. Something had just woken up. Jake drew his flashlight and stepped cautiously into the hangar. Inside, the air was dense with dust and stale metal, and the hum grew louder the deeper they went. On the far side of the structure stood a massive steel door, sealed, but blinking with a single red light. Seth moved toward a wall covered in peeling paint and scraped symbols. His fingers traced one symbol in particular, a triangle with a vertical slash. "They marked the entrances like this," he said. "Only the core team knew what it meant." Jake knelt beside the steel doors panel. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but when he laid his palm flat against the side, the red light turned green. A click echoed in the chamber. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. "You're coming?" Jake asked. Seth hesitated. Then, "I think I've been down there before." They descended in silence, each step creaking. At the bottom was a corridor, walls lined with mirrors and lights that flickered weakly to life as they passed. There were cells, observation rooms, recording stations behind glass. Jake stopped in front of one of the rooms. The placard on the GI wall read Subject 12, no entry without code 941. Inside, the room was empty except for a hospital bed and restraints bolted into the frame. The walls were covered with drawings, childlike, frantic, dark. And on one side, painted with shaking hands, were the words, "I remember the fire." Jake turned to Seth. "Do you know who 12 was?" Seth shook his head. "But I think I was supposed to." Jake reached into his bag and inserted the flash drive into a portable reader. The screen flickered on. File Experiment Log 941. Date, January 12, 2015, Subject 12. Name redacted, condition volatile. Memory fragmentation, psi index off charts. Subject shows signs of shared consciousness with other test units. Jake scrolled further. A video clip began to play. The camera was shaky and the timestamp flickered. A girl, no older than 10, sat, strapped to the bed in the room they now stood in. Her hair was shaved on one side, her eyes distant. She spoke. "He's watching from the other side, through the wires, through the mirrors." A man's voice from off-camera. "Who is?" The girl. "You." Jake stopped the video. Seth took a step back. "That's not possible." "What?" "I've seen her before," Seth whispered. "In my dreams, always looking at me, always whispering that I forgot something." Jake's blood turned cold. This wasn't just an experiment. This was a link, a shared network between all the subjects. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Then a low chime echoed through the corridor. A security system? A countdown? Jake grabbed Seth. "We need to move now." But before they could reach the stairs, The steel door slammed shut above them, and a new voice filled the corridor. Not a recording. A voice alive. "Hello again, Subject 6. Jake froze. Only one person had ever called him that. Dr. Asher. Jake turned slowly toward the source of the voice, heart pounding. Speakers embedded in the ceiling crackled to life. The voice was smoother now, aged but unmistakable. Dr. Nathaniel Asher, the man who had overseen Jake's trials, the architect behind the Institute's most controversial procedures. "I've been watching your progress," the voice continued. "I must admit you've come farther than expected." Jake stepped forward. "You're alive." "Oh yes," Asher said, "and still very much involved. This facility may have been decommissioned to the public eye, but I've kept it operational for moments like this." Seth clutched his head. "He's in my mind again," he muttered. "Like before. Like when they made me scream without making a sound." Jake raised his voice. "What do you want?" "To finish what?" "We started," Asher replied. "You were the anomaly, Jake. Subject 6, the first to reject the tether. The only one to sever the link without cognitive decay. That made you precious." "Precious enough to ruin," Jake hissed. Asher chuckled. "You can't ruin what's already broken. You simply redirect it." The lights above flickered again, and the far wall of the corridor hissed, revealing another door sliding open. Inside was a chamber unlike the others, walls smooth and seamless, glowing with soft, pulsing light. In the center stood a single containment pod. Within it, a figure. Jake and Seth stepped inside. The pod's glass was frosted, but a small round window allowed a glimpse of the occupant, a girl. Now older, maybe 20, pale, motionless, eyes closed. Seth gasped. "That's her. Subject 12. She was never released," Asher said. "While the others scattered, she remained our cornerstone, the foundation of the shared link. Without her, the tether collapses, and with it, the network we built." Jake looked around. Screens buzzed with data. EEGs, biometrics, neural maps. This was the control center. "You used her like a battery," Jake said. "She volunteered," Asher responded. "At least in the way children can when they're molded to believe they have a purpose. But don't worry. She's safe. For now." Jake turned to Seth. "We have to get her out." Seth was trembling. "You don't understand. If we unplug her, it all collapses, not just the system, but the minds of everyone still tethered. Me, maybe even you." Jake's mind raced. A choice. Rescue her and risk their own unraveling, or leave her, and allow the Institute to continue. "Let me make it simple," Asher said, his voice growing darker. "Walk away now, and I'll let you both leave. Try to save her, and you'll see what happens when the mind shatters from the inside." Jake's jaw clenched. He turned back to the pod. His hand hovered over the release mechanism, and then she opened her eyes. Her eyes were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Silver, almost translucent, like mirrors rippling with light. The moment they opened, a shockwave passed through the room. Not a sound, not a tremor, but something deeper, like his memories had all been stirred at once. Seth stumbled back, gasping. "She's awake. That means it's already started." Jake reached toward the pod's control panel. The system interface began to flicker, then reshaped itself. Words formed across the screen. "Link stabilizing. Core network online. Jake." The voice wasn't through the speakers. It was inside his head. The girl, Subject 12, wasn't just conscious. She was reaching out, weaving thoughts directly into his mind. He turned to her. "Who are you?" The response came not in words, but images. Memories that weren't his. A room of glass, other children sobbing behind mirrors, needles, flashes of blue light, and Dr. Asher's voice whispering promises of greatness. Then, finally, a feeling. Betrayal. Deep, raw, irreversible betrayal. Jake slammed his hand against the emergency release. The pod hissed and unlocked. Steam escaped around the edges. Subject 12 took her first breath outside in years. She didn't stumble. She didn't speak. She simply walked forward and took Jake's hand, Seth watched with wide eyes. "What have you done?" "She's not a prisoner anymore," Jake said. But the floor beneath them began to tremble. Alarms blared. Red lights washed over the corridor. The system was failing piece by piece. The containment pod behind them collapsed into itself like a crushed tin can. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Asher's voice returned, louder now, laced with rage. "You fools, do you have any idea what you've done? She was the key, the last stabilizer. Without her, you lose your power," Jake snapped. But Asher wasn't finished. "You've doomed yourself. The tether is unraveling. The others, dozens of them. They'll feel the rupture. You'll feel it." Jake felt it already, his mind beginning to echo, thoughts looping, flickers of memories not his own surfacing and blurring. He clenched his fists, trying to stay present. Subject 12, now fully conscious, stepped forward. She placed her hand on the wall and instantly the light stabilized. The tremor stopped. "She's not just the key," Seth whispered. "She's the fail-safe." Through the wall speakers, Asher was silent. Jake turned to her. "Can you shut it down? All of it?" She looked at him, those strange eyes full of centuries of pain in such a young face, and nodded. But then she touched Jake's temple. Suddenly he saw everything, every experiment, every subject, every room, the entire project. From his first, memory lost to the moment he escaped. She had been there watching, linked, not as a battery but as the one holding the net in place, keeping every mind afloat, and now she was giving him the choice. "You can carry it," she whispered, "or I can let it all go." Jake looked at Seth, whose body was shaking. "What happens if I take it?" "You keep them safe. Their memories stay intact. The others survive, but your mind will change. You won't be the same. And if we let it go, they forget everything. They'll be free but lost. No names, no history, no you." Jake took a deep breath. He looked around. The broken facility. He thought of the old woman who had tried to give him a new life, of the boy who ran from the mirror, of every name he didn't remember but somehow still loved. "I'll carry it." The moment he said it, the world blurred. Subject 12 stepped back and placed both hands on his chest. It was like drowning and flying at once. His veins burned, not with pain but with a flood of light. Names, faces, numbers, rooms, laughter, screams. It was all there. Jake collapsed to his knees, gasping. The girl smiled, and for the first time she looked like a child. "You're not Subject 6 anymore," she said. "You're the Ark." Seth knelt beside him. "Jake?" "I'm okay," he whispered. "I remember now." Behind them, the systems began to shut down. Screens turned black. Doors unlocked. The Institute's last breath exhaled into silence. Asher never spoke again. They walked out of the hangar as the desert sun began to set. No explosions, no chase, just silence. Peaceful and full. Jake carried the weight of 100 lives, but he wasn't alone. Seth walked beside him, and the girl, finally free, held his hand. Weeks passed. The world didn't end. There were no headlines, no breaking news, just a subtle shift. A handful of people across the country who, without knowing why, woke up with a memory that felt more like a dream. A name, a corridor, a fire, and peace where once there had only been noise. Jake moved into a quiet house on the edge of Sedona. Small, remote, safe. The girl, who now called herself Lila, lived there too. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was with a calmness that filled the room like sunlight. Seth visited daily. Therapy helped, but it was Jake's presence that kept him grounded. They worked on rebuilding what the Institute had broken, not just in themselves, but in others. Anonymous. Letters, unmarked packages. Drives sent to scattered names with just enough evidence to begin their own healing. One evening, Jake sat on the porch, watching the stars rise. Lila joined him. "Do you ever miss who you were?" she asked. Jake thought for a long time. "I think I miss the not knowing it was easier. But now you're real." He nodded. A shooting star crossed the sky. Lila smiled. Somewhere far beneath a decommissioned facility, servers powered down for the final time. The story was over, but the memory would live on. And Jake, now fully himself, finally understood. He hadn't just married into a strange life to survive. He had walked into fire to remember who he truly was, and in the end, he wasn't a subject or an experiment or a victim. He was the one who chose, the one who carried, the one who set them all free. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what part of this story impacted you the most.